So there's something that's been annoying me in the firearms community and industry for the last handful of years, and that is the proliferation of bad Ambi controls. So today I'm going to talk about how I, as a fully left-handed person, set up and use my AR-15, and then what parts I recommend. This is going to get a little bit wordy, so just to hit the big points in the beginning, and then you can close this out or continue watching should you feel the need. Left-handed uppers, if you know what you're getting into, sure, go for it. I personally don't. I think the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Ambi lowers, I think there's some that get close, but for all of them kind of miss the mark on how I would like them to be, and that is a mirror image side to side. So what I do is I take a standard mil-spec lower and I put Ambi parts on it. Again, I'm gonna go into detail what I prefer and why as we continue on, but just for the quick facts, Ambi charging handle, Ambi safety, Ambi mag release, I consider those a necessity. And then the bolt lock, bolt release, you can get away with a standard one. I prefer one that's a little bit biased to the rear, and we'll talk about that in the future. So we'll just break down this video into what parts I recommend and why, what I think the problem is, and then what solutions are there in the future or where we should be looking. So going into the parts I recommend and why. Before we get too deep into it, I will say, if you're new to all this or you're like trying to figure out what parts you need or whatever, I would start with a standard mil-spec setup and get used to running it left-handed, such as like using the knuckle of your hand or whatever to sweep the safety, doing a grip and rip on the mag release, and then kind of running the T-handle over the top, just because the vast majority of AR-15s you're going to run into aren't going to be set up for you, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't set up yours for you. So most important, I believe Ambi safety is the most important. I personally run the FCD. I just like it. It has the most positive lock. It's 45 degrees, or I think they say it's 50, but there's no question of where safe ends and fire begins, if that makes sense. I do like the Radian Talon, but that's one of the issues it has is in the middle. It's kind of not consistent when the switch from safe to fire is. One thing we'll get to in the future, I kind of made my own mistake here. I run a long lever on the right side and a short on the left side. I'm going to be saying a lot how I should be mirrored side to side, and I kind of broke my own rule there, but that's just my preference. The old school ones that have the little set screw, they're fine. They make sure you Loctite them because they come loose. I've had those come loose. There's other designs out there. There are very few I wouldn't recommend. I'm not a big fan of the Geisley Posi Snap because the side a lefty use is, well, it snaps into place positively. I just didn't like it. I thought it kind of felt like crap for a lefty. So I would steer you away from that. But honestly, as long as it's Ambi, you should be fine. People complain about the lever kind of digging into their hand when it's a 90 degree. Obviously, this being a 50, it's not really going to happen as much. But that's kind of a moot point. All you're doing is, if that happens, just curl your finger a little. Like, it really shouldn't be that big of a deal. Going into the next part is the charging handle. On this gun, I have the FCD, which isn't really my favorite, but it's the one I prefer if I want a more low profile charging handle, which I typically don't, because then that leads into you kind of busting your finger on the forward assist. Usually I recommend the Radian Raptor SD. The levers, honestly, kind of biased towards a left-handed person, which is good. They're big enough that you get a positive grip on them without it snagging on gear, which is to go into some of the ones I don't recommend. Geisley charging handles are nice. The small is too small, the large is too big. I've had the large catch on gear, and when I ran the small, I was busting my finger on the forward assist like nonstop. So I don't like the Geisleys. The LMTs and Knights ones are okay. They're nothing special. would steer you more towards the Radian or the FCD, if I'm being honest, and specifically the Radian. And the reason I say the SD, this is kind of something that's hard for lefties, the gas busting kind of charging handles, you will never get one that is perfect as a lefty. Unless you run a left-sided upper, all they're gonna do is move the gas from coming out the charging handle and like the fence kind of driving it up. They're gonna create a cloud right by the ejection port, which is fine if you're shooting stationary. But if you're doing like shooting and moving in drills or anything like that, you're gonna make a cloud and then you're gonna run through it and gas yourself out. And you know, that's just kind of the name of the game. So I wouldn't get too wrapped around the axle about which ones bust gassed the best, with the exception, avoid the PRI gas busters, and I don't know if it's all the models or just certain ones, but I would avoid them at all costs, and I'll show you why. Looking at that picture, it should be relatively obvious, but whoever designed that should be charged with hate crimes against lefties, because who thought it was a good idea to make an Ambi charging handle and then drill the gas vent right into where a lefty's face would be? You are literally taking cancer gas straight to the face if you use one of those charging handles. And it's a shame because they're actually pretty nice, but that design is god awful. Avoid those at all costs. The next piece I would recommend is an ambidextrous magazine release. Again, kind of the theme with a lot of these parts. Most of them work, it's just what scale on good to great they are. I firmly recommend the Norgan, and the reason being is it is the most button-like, and it also puts it at a mirror image with the other side. I'll try and shoot that from another angle so you can see it. The reason I say it's more button-like is a lot of the modern designs have kind of like a lever that hinges back. You'll see this on the SIG, the FCD, and some other designs. And I just don't like the way that feels. It doesn't feel like a button, which is a weird complaint, but I've also had mag releases with that style drop mags from bumping into gear. And this one, the Norgan, I have never had that happen. And this is designed the same way. It's still just a lever that pivots up to release the mag, but it's just smaller, so it doesn't have that same feel. Some people like the Troy, and they're fine, but they move the button kind of down and forward, and it's just not ideal. I've heard mixed things about how reliable they are, but just based off of how the design looks, I would steer away from that. And Knights makes an extended, and I think some other companies too, an extended like winter mag release, or I don't know what they call it, but it moves it kind of back between the pins here. I hate that. That puts it at such a bad spot. As you can see, like my trigger finger is right where the button is, so I think moving it from that spot is kind of silly. And to show the mirror image thing, let's see if I can get it on camera. I'll put my finger on both mag releases. You can see they line up. So mirror image side to side, which is important to me. The next thing is, and it's the least important, is the bolt release. I like the FCD rearward bias one. Again, it puts it so my trigger finger can hit it kind of reliably. The normal one is fine. I mean, unless you have really short fingers, it shouldn't be necessary. And like I said, least important, the normal one works. That's what it is. If I were to hypothesize what I think the problem is, why companies can't seem to get this right, it's that the margins aren't there. A lot of these companies, their primary goal is military and LE contracts, right? And the contract comes out and says the gun needs to be ambidextrous. So they just slap a button on the right side and say it's good. And it doesn't have to be the most ergonomic or best designed thing in the world, because if you look at the numbers, only 10, I think it's like 10 to 20% of the population is left-handed. And then what percentage of that is going to be going into this realm of product purchasing, let's say. So they just don't care. And that's how things work. Profit margins, engineering, the like that, that's how it's going to go. I would submit that to avoid stagnation, these companies should be pushing the limit and trying to make firearms ambidextrous in ways that actually make sense, as if they tried or actually tested this stuff. Some companies in Europe are doing that, and I'll throw in some pictures when we talk about it. But that's what I think the problem. The other thing is there's a lot of really bad information out there, and don't get me wrong, there is some exceptions. Regular guy training, he has very good videos about left-handed controls and ambidextrous controls and stuff like that. There's some others too that have pretty solid advice. But if you just type into YouTube, Lefty AR-15 setup, a lot of the people handing out advice are left eye dominant but right-handed, or are right-handed people trying to come up with a way to use the gun left-handed. And it's not that they're wrong. Well, I mean, they are, but it's not that they're entirely wrong, but they're used to running everything else in their life right-handed. They're used to using that side. So when it feels a little silly to use their left hand to do this stuff, that's what's normal to them. I'm left-handed all the time. This is what feels normal, right? So like things being slightly off or not as optimized for the left-handed person immediately sticks out to me that it doesn't on these people that are more popular, let's say. So that's what I think the problem is. You know, we're never going to get past the population thing. You know, we're, like I said, we're 10 to 20%. Companies do not care about that kind of a margin. It's kind of on us to just point out the bad job they're doing and hope they do better in the future. And one of the ways you can see this is specifically with emergency reloads. So if you're right-handed, you should be reloading an AR-15 like this.
So if this thing fired till it was empty, if you took the old mag out and put the new magazine in, I would hit the bolt release, which is, oh my God, right under my thumb. Is that amazing? Stoner and God got together so you could hit that thing and load that rifle. That is awesome, okay? Rather than me dicking with a charging handle. So that's pretty cool.
And obviously if you're left-handed, you can't do that. So what do? We reinsert the magazine with our right hand, and then we can use our left hand to hit the bolt release. The problem is the companies designing the other side bolt release are not following this like mirror image principle. And I'll show you, just so we're clear here, I'll put my finger on the bolt release on this side, and then I'll try and line it up somewhere like here. So if you see, the problem is with the AR-15 in its current iteration is the bolt release would have to go in this bottom corner. So these companies would have to redesign the shell deflector and the ejection port cover to fit a mirror image bolt catch bolt release. They're not gonna do that for reasons we already discussed. You see some like SIG putting the little lever, which is actually a pretty good design. I just wish they would put it on the other side too. LMT, LWRC, they put one, and they're good. I actually like that. Problem is they move it down and towards the back, and I'll show a picture of that. And while at least they're trying, the problem is when you reload as a lefty, the way this gun was designed for right-handed people to reload, you insert the magazine, and where you're reaching, the bolt's actually back here. So now you're having to do some kind of like hand gymnastics. And I got size large hands, so it should be easy, but I find I'm having to like stretch and reach to hit those bolt catch bolt releases. So I just don't like them. I'd rather just use my trigger finger. The buttons, I talked about the lever. That's good. Again, just put it on the other side. The buttons are fine. They're usually placed okay, again, low. But most of them, the majority of them, only drop. So to me, that doesn't meet the goals. It should be a mirror side to side. So I should be able to lock and release from the right side as I do on the left side, which you can't with those buttons. And kind of like I mentioned with the mag release, I want it to feel like a button on both sides. So if you're gonna put a button here, you gotta put a button on the other side. It's just how I think it should go. The other thing to keep in mind is don't give up the benefits of being left-handed just to have ambi controls. one of the things we get, and I'll just speak on it real quick, if you have any kind of malfunction or double feed, something like that, when you're left-handed with the ejection port on the right side, it's right in your face. You can see it. And then going along with that, to clear that malfunction, we're not having to like set the gun on our thigh to press the lock and pull the T handle back. We can just press it with our trigger finger, run the charging handle, and it locks back. It's significantly easier. So why are we like adding complication here when we already have a very easy way of dealing with those problems, which, you know, if it's properly tuned, working AR-15, you shouldn't be having them anyway, but things happen. Going into what I would like to see in some possible fixes or places we can look for fixes. On the pistol side, I didn't really talk on this much. I really think we should be going to both side mag releases at some point. I think that's the way the design should go. I understand there's some problems with like gripping with your support hand. Not everybody's hands are created equal. To that, you know, I accept the swappable magazine release. I prefer both on both sides. We just got to find a way to design it where we're not running into these grip issues, much like with this FN. Ambidextrous slide stop, slide release, that's mandatory in my mind. Any gun design going forward has to have that. I just don't understand it. If you're running a single action only or any kind of gun with a safety, that has to be ambidextrous. Honestly, on the pistol side, things are kind of looking up. I've seen a lot more of designs like this getting announced at SHOT Show, and just, you know, new releases seem to be heading that way. With the exception of the micro compacts, no one seems to give a shit about us when it comes to micro compacts. There's that weird HK thing, but I don't know if that's ever going to actually come out. And then on the rifle side, the main place I would be looking at is Europe. They are absolutely whooping our ass when it comes to ambi controls. The main ones being B&T, the APC series, and I believe the SPC as well has very good ambi controls. If not the same, is just take a look, all right? We have bolt catch, bolt release, magazine release. And on the other side, you have the same thing. And the craziest part is that it's mirrored. So it's almost as if someone who actually gave a shit and tried designed their ambi controls. I think they're fantastic. Obviously, I bought one and I kept it. I think this kind of design is where we should be going. And I'm not an engineer or anything, but just like poking around and taking a look, I don't really see any reason why this type of lower design wouldn't work on an AR-15, with the SPC being the example. To my knowledge, you know, like I said, I'm not an engineer or a gunsmith or anything, but it looks very similar looking at the lower receivers, with the exception of them being at 9, obviously. The other one to look at is some of the H&K designs. I'll roll in a picture of their weird, I think it's a 437 or something. So that has very good ambi controls, kind of like the MCX Spear with that lever, but it's on both sides. And the reason I point that one out is there's earlier designs of that gun that have a more standard AR-15 looking lower. So clearly they put some thought into it and did a redesign. So I didn't want this video to be completely negative, but I think we should be looking towards those designs and how we can redesign the AR-15 lower to get those features. There you go. That's my unhinged rant on ambidextrous controls when it comes to firearms. The main point is we should not be letting these companies get away with really half-assed designs when it comes to ambidextrous controls, specifically because there are companies out there actually trying and keeping the lefty in mind when they're designing this stuff. You know, do I expect there to be some kind of industry revolution when it comes to ambi controls? Probably not. No one's really going to see this. But who knows? Maybe when your buddy is about to hit add to cart on that, what's a horrible ambi lower? Like Santan Tactical or something like that. Some horrible ambi lower, thinking it's the coolest thing ever. Maybe, you know, you can hand him a beer and tell him some of the points I've said. and we could stop some of this craziness, because some of it is just a bit ridiculous in my mind. Um, and to be real though, find out what you like and run it, but you got to actually think about it when you run it. You know, put some actual thought into the design, put some actual thought into what you're picking. You know, if you need a little bit of advice, I would say focus on the mirror image thing. Mirror image side to side, it's going to be ambidextrous. That's how it goes. And at the end of the day, you know, run what you like, because you really shouldn't care what I think.